Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our spotlight session for Noir at the Bar, Edinburgh. Session where we get to get a little bit more in depth about authors that we think you should be reading. And so we want to bring out authors whose work we've enjoyed when they've read to us, or we've had a sneak peek at their manuscript, but they're as yet to be published. But before we get into this evening's interview, I wonder where my partner in crime is, Kelly Lacey. Here she comes.
Hello.
Well, good evening, Kelly. How are we doing?
Very well. Good evening. Isn't this lovely?
It's absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for organising all this. Would you like to, this feels so American, would you like to say a little word about our sponsor?
Well, I sure would. Okay. So this event tonight is sponsored by Picari Chocolate UK. They are sponsoring the upgrade of StreamYard so that we can stream on different channels and not just one. It also allows us to record in advance, etc. You can use the code LOVEBOOKS10. I think it's down here somewhere as well.
Yep.
To receive 10% off their whole website. So we're very grateful to them, and a big woohoo and thank you for making it possible for us to reach more people. And so you can enjoy a delicious, scrumptious, organic snack with your book.
Wonderful. Thank you for organising that as well, because it's great to get those independent names out there. Yeah, we like our independent bookstores and we like our independent chocolate suppliers for sure.
Yes, and good chocolate too, organic, vegan, soya bean free, maybe. It's something soya free.
Wonderful.
My bad.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you. So, do you have tonight's author? There, coming forward. So, and here he is with us. Andy Hill, welcome. Good evening.
Thanks, Jacky. It's a pleasure and an honour, of course, to be interviewed by Dr. Noir.
Andy, for me too, in the sense that you and I have known each other for quite a few years now, thanks to great crime fiction festivals, and what I feel very much on Facebook is that really supportive crime fiction community. Yeah. And when we were doing a little rehearsal, just testing the technology this afternoon, and just the idea of you are the kind of person who is always there for others. You know, I've watched it. You've always got a supportive word, a listening ear. The reviews that you write, you know, it's Shots Mag that you've written for, is it?
Yeah. About 3-4 years now. Yeah,
exactly. So we thought that given that you have been writing your crime fiction, that's why we wanted to have you on here and give you a chance to talk about yourself and what you're doing. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, no, great. I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Well, just in case, you know, people out there who don't know you, I wonder if you could set us off by telling us about the road to crime fiction, you know, and in particular because it's sort of police procedural that you write.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder why you got into crime fiction and what it means to you.
I mean, I think my earliest memories really of reading were mystery and crime with the famous five. You know, I was a huge fan of Enid Blyton, and I think that's really sort of carried right the way through my life. And then I suppose about 10 years ago, I went to Crime Fest for the first time, and I'd been to CSI Portsmouth before that Pauline runs, and it really sort of set me off because I thought it would be quite strange being a fan in amongst authors, but as you quite rightly said, the crime writing fraternity is just the most welcoming fraternity. I've long held a theory that all the angst and anger is on the page and all that's left is the love. And I have firm friends and really supportive friends who've just been so fantastic about me trying to get published. But it's also been a pleasure to actually review books, and then those people become friends as well. So yeah, it's been I've really missed Newcastle Noir. I've missed Crime Fest this year, and and Capital Crime is kind of the only one that's left on the diary at the moment. So
Unless,
yeah,
unless you can make it over for Iceland Noir. I hear they're still holding out for that one as well in November.
well, they might be doing it, but I don't know if they're going to let us Brits in with our current situation.
There is that, isn't there? Anyway, without further ado, I wonder, would you bring us to your work so that then we can dissect it, if you like? Are you going to you're going to read to us from Dead Drift? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit sort of after the start, and effectively my protagonist is an ex-copper who's medically retired about 20 years ago. He's about 50 years old, so he was he was destined for high position, and then a very serious knee injury gave him a situation where he had to choose between either leaving the force or going to be stuck behind a desk, and he didn't want to be stuck behind a desk, and there were some other family issues that came into it. And he's basically been an estate agent for 20 years in a village in the New Forest, and I lived there for 30 years, so I know the forest really well. And everybody kind of knows everybody in villages, but I'm always sort of mindful of Bruce Springsteen's great album Darkness on the Edge of Town, where the darkness in the edge of town is the countryside, and I don't think you get any darker place, frankly. So he's actually been made redundant the day before the book opens, and he's just taking a day's fly fishing on the River Test. It's set in the New Forest in Hampshire. River Test is the premier chalk stream in the country, in my humble opinion. And he's been fishing a little while, and the body of a friend floats down the river to him.
Take us there.
Now we could hear the sirens. The first uniformed officers appeared about 10 minutes later, closely followed by his friend and a tall, plainclothes detective of mixed race. "What bait were you using?" Mick Sparks said in his hot, soft Hampshire burr. Jack forced a smile. "I don't suppose I can get out of the water anytime soon." The closeness to the body was becoming unsettling, a mixture of helplessness and a need to distance himself. He wanted to take a pace back, but fought that compulsion off. "Not yet, I'm sorry to say," Sparks answered, then called to the uniformed officers. "Cordon off this area. We're going to need both sides of the river searched. Make sure that unit is on its way to the DC. So, sorry, where are my manners? This is DC Marcus Taylor," Sparks pointed to the other detective. "Good to meet you, Mr. Lunn," Taylor said. "He used to be DI Sparks's boss." "A long time ago," Lunn replied. "Not what you normally see as part of an independent advisory group," Sparks remarked. "It's certainly a change from fly tipping, petty theft and poaching with the IAG. What can you tell me about this, then, that DI asked? Any enemies?" Lunn knew that Sparks needed something to work with and dropped back into his former role as best he could. "She was a widow of about 80. Not the most popular figure in the area. She lived by herself, had a gardener, a cleaner, a couple of times a week. Upset a lot of people over the years, but enemies might be too strong a word." Sparks' eyes narrowed and he looked over at Lunn thoughtfully. "Could she have struck her head and fallen in?" Lunn sighed. "If you're asking my opinion, it's more likely she was hit from behind. Wounds clean, no blood. She's probably killed last night, may have been caught up somewhere. The river's flow increased about an hour ago, so the keeper upstream must have opened a couple of hatches, and that would have released the body." "You haven't lost it then," DC Taylor remarked. "How far that little candle throws his beam, so shines a good deed in a naughty world," Lunn replied, bowing slightly to the young detective and receiving a smile and the same in return. "Not bad for a civvy. We'll have to wait for the CSIs assigned from FRMU to recover the body," Sparks informed him. "FRMU? Forensic Resource Management Unit. God, I love the police and their acronyms," Jack replied. "Then you'll get the dubious pleasure of watching me stripping off and getting fingerprinted." Sparks smiled at his old boss. "Tempting, but the only way you've touched the body is contact with your waders and net, am I right? I might have been out of the force for a good few years, but I remember enough not to bugger up a crime scene." Lunn shook his head. "What sort of person kills an old lady like this, Mick?" "We'll find out," the DI paused. "Bring back memories, is it? They both deserved a bit better end," Lunn replied. Death lies on her like an untimely frost upon the sweetest flower of all the field. The three of them stood for a moment in silence, with just the sounds of the running water from the river. Any family? Taylor asked, taking out his notebook. A son, daughter-in-law, 2 grandchildren in their 20s. So they'll be the beneficiaries? I think so, Lund said. The uniforms were busy stringing up tape as 4 more figures approached. First pair swathed in white overalls, and the other 2 were in scuba diving dry suits. Why the underwater recovery team? Lund asked. You just pass me a pair of gloves and tell me what to do. Got to follow protocols in health and safety, came the reply. Photographs and video were taken before Sparks offered a hand, and Jack hauled himself awkwardly out of the river, wincing as he flexed his right knee. A war wound playing up, is it? The DI asked. No worse than normal. Standing still doesn't help it, particularly in a cold river. Fishing probably not the wisest hobby then. I hadn't planned on standing in cold water for half an hour, Lund replied. Do you mind if I take another look at the body? Is it something in particular, Mick? Sparks queried. The CSIs were about to bag their hands and he saw what troubled him. There. What? Sparks asked. Her rings are missing. You can see from the faint timelines where they used to be. Theft? If they're not in her house, then that's certainly a strong motive. There was a wedding, an engagement ring for certain, maybe an eternity ring. Check the photos at the house. I'll bet you'll see what they've been missing. We should get you back to the station, Sparks said. Come on, Mick. I'll give you a lift back. By the way, we won't be going back to Lyndhurst, Nick, Sparks said. Got to visit that new one in Southampton. You know where that is. That glass and concrete thing, you can hardly miss it. I take it your boss is on his way down here. The DCI is, and the new superintendent's waiting at the office. Jeff Cook's the new superintendent, isn't he? Lund asked. And he wants to talk to you, Jack, so don't be a smart ass. I know you two have never got on, but I'll be the one getting the grief if you clash with him. Got confirmed on Monday. I'm surprised Marianne didn't tell you. You know my ex-wife and I don't talk very often, particularly now that she's married to him. That could have been you, Jack. Could have, would have, should have. I'm more than happy to share the information that I've got. Help in any way. His first murder as a superintendent. You know I want to wrap this up quickly. I know you guys are stretched with all the cutbacks you've had, but quickly is when mistakes get made. Still, you and Jeff Cook working together again. Now there's something I never thought I'd see, Sparks replied. Careful what you wish for, Mick. We'll get you logged in, take you upstairs, do the statement, and get you out of here quick as a flash, Sparks said. Suits me, Jack. Sarah would have a fit if she knew I was here. They took the lift up to the major investigation team's floor. Jack swept the baseball cap off his head, ran his fingers through his greying hair, and stepped out into a very modern, open-plan office. He could see that every desk now had a monitor and a keyboard. It was quite at odds with what he'd been used to, back when mobile phones were the size of a house brick and the computers relatively rare. Sparks knocked on a door and a disembodied voice came from inside. Superintendent Cook was sat behind the desk and barely glanced up at the 2 new arrivals. His thinning hair was in full retreat to his shirt collar, and it was obvious he rarely missed a meal. So you discovered the body, he said. Yes, Superintendent, Lund replied. Congratulations on the promotion, by the way. Cook turned to Sparks and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Get his statement and get him out of here. Lund cleared his throat and the superintendent looked back at him wearily. What? I know you've got I know a fair bit about Mrs. Lamont's life in the village and have a few ideas. Of course you've got ideas, but I'm sure I don't have to remind you that you're no longer in the job. The superintendent dismissed him. Lund took a step back towards the door. Always such a pleasure to see you, Jeff. Sparks closed the door behind them as they left. A one-track mind in a surround sound world, Lund muttered.
Oh, Andy, thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
I wonder if we could start with Jack Lund. You have introduced us to him and you've told us a little bit about him.
Yeah.
But I wanted to know why you chose to make him an ex-police officer.
I kind of wanted, I'm an ex-copper myself, a long, long time ago. And I wanted somebody who wasn't hidebound by health and safety and rules and regulations, who could sort of nose around a little bit more, talk to people that perhaps wouldn't get talked to. And as the book unfolds, there's a couple of characters in there that probably the police wouldn't talk to, but Jack knows that they're plugged into what's going on and the sort of the New Forest jungle drums. And yeah, I didn't want. I also didn't want him running around with a gun. I didn't want him jumping over cars and all the sort of let's get the shooters, get the motor, and bang them up sort of thing. I didn't. I wanted somebody who was going to use his brain a little bit more, because I wanted him to be. I suppose I'm always mindful of sort of Poirot and the little grey cells, and Jack. It was always an instinctive copper. He wasn't somebody who kind of followed the track. He had gut feelings about things, and pushed the boundaries even when he was a copper. So I mean, that's kind of what intrigued me about him, because he wasn't operating within the lines.
And yet from the get-go, right at the beginning of the book, we know that this man, his abilities are still there. His capabilities as a detective are clearly showing. The incident where he says, "Oh, there's something. Wait a minute, it's the hands."
Yeah.
And then you bring us a man who has been through different kinds of grief and pain and loss, and you pit him at odds with his ex-wife's new husband in a way. That complexity of emotion, did you find that hard to put down on the page, or is that an aspect of your work that you relish and it comes easily for you?
It comes, I suppose, with knowing. I mean, before I was a copper, I was a customs officer, and there's a certain form of sort of banter, and so in terms of the exchanges between the coppers and Jack, I think that's relatively authentic. I think in terms of the pain that he goes through and the changes that he's had in his life, I wanted to. We all get to crossroads in our lives, and sometimes we take the wrong turn, and sometimes we get in a situation where we're forced to take, or we feel obliged to take a path. And Jack felt obliged to take the path that he took, and he felt that there was always this element with having had his police job taken away from him, that it was unfinished business.
Yeah.
And this kind of opens the door back for him. And although he's been involved with an IAG, an independent advisory group, and I spoke to Graham Bartlett about it, because I wanted the idea of him still having this slight involvement with the police. And Graham, who is Peter James's police advisor, said to me, you're a fool if you don't listen to the stuff that's coming out of your IAGs. So I wanted him to sort of still have a little bit of a foot in the camp, and I did want him to suffer, because I think there's elements of him there's elements of me in him, and there's elements of bad choices that I've made over the year being reflected in some of the bad choices that Jack makes. I think the difference is that when people have talked to me, and a couple of writers who've been very kind enough to sort of read it and have a look at it for me, have said there's elements of Jack in you, and vice versa. And I've always said, well, I'm twice the man he is, because he's only been divorced once, I've been divorced twice, and I've got 2 bad knees and he's only got 1. So yeah, I think I think if you've got a moral centre, which Jack has got this
that's clear.
moral centre, but he's not afraid of drifting into grey areas to get what he needs. And I think Jem, who you haven't met in that little section there, who's his partner's eldest daughter, I think is even more slightly rogue than Jack is.
And she's a former military intelligence officer, is that right?
Yeah, she is. She's pretty. I'll tell you how Jem came about, and I'm going to be absolutely brutally honest about this. Jem was not Jem to start out. She was actually a male character. And I was just finishing the final drafts of the last few chapters of what I thought was going to be the final draft. And my editor, Katie Forster, who used to be the MD of Virgin Books, she has never given me a bum steer ever. She's been absolutely wonderful, fantastic. And anybody who's watching this, if you're working on your manuscript, for God's sake, get yourself a professional editor. It's absolutely worth every penny. They are gold dust. And she phoned me up and said, how do you feel, and the character was called Dom originally, how do you feel about Dom being female? And my reaction to it was, like, I don't have a problem with the work. I'm not afraid of the changes that I've got to make, but I don't want it to be a tick box exercise. I don't, I didn't want it to be that. So she asked me to write sort of 500 words or so of a conversation between Jem and Jack, and also to do a character profile of Jem, which I did and sent it off to her. And she phoned me back fairly quickly later, laughing at me, saying, basically, you've stitched yourself up, haven't you? And I said, yeah, I knew that when I was writing it, because the character profile was so much fuller. The interchange was very good. And as I went back through the book and the manuscript, doing the re-edit, I was giving Jem more and more stuff to do. So she's multilingual, like yourself. Yeah, she's a strong character. She's not, she doesn't take prisoners at all. She served in Iraq, military intelligence. She did her 5 years, came out as a captain. And she's borderline brilliant. She's got a very, very sharp mind. Yeah, I really like her as a character now, and her and Jack, I think and I hope work well together.
I mean, I've had a little sneak preview, as it were, of the manuscript, and I think they do. I was very, caught by her character, and also by the way they interact. But the premise of the book is unearthing family secrets, is it not? There's this thing there, and I wanted to ask, because you said that the place where this happens, it's a place where you're familiar with. Do you know of these things? Have people spoken to you about things like this, or did you create things out with what your experience might have been?
Well, there was a very famous murder back in the New Forest, probably 30, 40 years ago, and it was actually a family that was killed, and they were actually basically murdered by people who broke in, who knew the family, broke in and killed them, sexually assaulted one of the women, and it was a fairly horrific murder, and that gave me sort of the grain of the idea. But I think one of the things that living in a village like I did in the New Forest sort of taught me was that everybody knows everybody's business, and enmity is long held, and families that don't get on haven't got on for decades or even generations. And I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit, but there's also that element of I wanted Jack to have a backstory. So in terms of, I wanted him to have a home life, and the ending that there is now, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, the ending that there is now is certainly not the ending that I first wrote. I actually cut, I don't know, 20 or 30,000 words off the back end of the book and then rewrote it. And it's the right ending now, I think, because it's the laws of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and I think what it did do then as well was it creates a dynamic within Jack's home, which is interesting to explore as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
Beautiful. Thank you. The other thing that I think is important is you mentioned the New Forest, and that setting in that area, and out with the book. Can I ask you what does that place mean to you?
Oh, I think just on the basis of the history of the New Forest, it was a royal hunting ground. A king has died in that, died there. Witchcraft, even going up to the Second World War, there was a coven of witches operating there, and that is going to be part of a further story if a publisher is good enough to pick up. Not the next one that I've already started to write, but possibly the third one. I mean, there were six aerodromes in the New Forest during the Second World War on the build up to D-Day. So there's a fantastic amount of history there, and you can still, well, Bewley, which is where the Motor Museum is now, that was the headquarters for SOE. That was where they went and finished their training in the New Forest. So, there's so much that's gone on there over the years. And I could, when I lived there, and I lived with an ex-partner there. So 2 marriages, 2 ex-partners, not exactly a advert for relationships, is it? But there we go. We had 4 dogs, and within 10 minutes we could be out on the open forest, and it wasn't unknown for us to be walking in the New Forest and see deer. Obviously, the New Forest ponies. One of the things I love about the New Forest is that there are commoners' rights attached to quite a few of the houses. We had, what did we have? Panage and one other, which basically meant that come October, when the acorns are around, they don't want the horses eating the acorns. You can turn your pigs out. And that is a plot point in number 2.
Lovely. I have another question. I'm sorry, I've got some more, and I'm aware, of our time. The title, Dead Drift.
Yeah.
Now, yes, in the opening, sadly, there is a dead body drifting in the river. Does it have another significance?
It does, yeah. It's a fly fishing technique as well. So it's a fishing technique for check nymphing, which nobody's going to be interested in. But because it had the double meaning, I just loved it.
It's beautiful, because I was going to ask you as well. He is so into fishing. He's there, he's at the river, and I wanted to ask, are you a keen? Yeah.
And I don't go anywhere near as much as I'd love to. He is very, very lucky to have a rod on the River Test, because a day there on a premium stretch is, at the height of the season, is like £300 or £400 a day.
Okay.
It's extremely expensive, but I enjoy my fly fishing, and I just thought, well, write what you know.
Definitely. But I also think as well, the way that you write it, because I think there's always a danger of when you're very knowledgeable about something and you talk about it in a way that might lose people's attention who don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
But I've never been fly fishing. It's not. But even from the outset, I was gripped by the notion of him being there and what fishing meant to him. To be able to be there. So I really enjoyed that. I'm going to put you on the spot. I hope you don't mind, but we're here to showcase you, so it's important. What do you think, and don't be modest, what do you think are the strengths of your writing?
I think the conversation is realistic, and again, one of the techniques that I used was, if I was getting stuck with a bit of conversation that I need to get through, I stuck on the West Wing. Aaron Sorkin is a genius at walk and talk, and I always found that helped me. I think, Jackson, I think that you've got a number of really interesting characters there. I hope you've got a number of interesting characters. You've got also a number of sort of slightly more fringe characters, but they're characters.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think the forest and the setting itself is a character, and just to touch back on the fly fishing, it's one of the things that I love is just being in nature, and just sitting by the waterside sometimes, and just watching. I've been privileged to see kingfishers and otters over the years, and that kind of thing is just a joy. And I think that's part of Jack, hopefully, that I'm sort of channeling through that.
Mm-hmm. I have to say, Andy, I think you do channel it very nicely, and I'm sorry, but our time is fast upon us. And what I wanted to say, for anybody who hasn't had a chance to see your manuscript, is there's a strong artistic sense about it. That you paint a picture with
Thank
your
you.
words, without a doubt. Again, as you were speaking about the places, my mind was full of a space with nature and animals. I could hear the river and things like that. So, I really hope somebody out there picks this up. We've been saying recently that there's an agent for every book and there's a book for every agent. I think the same for publishers. I think it's just a question of finding the right fit, and I really hope you do. So,
Thank you.
On behalf of Honey and Stag, I want to thank you so much for being here this evening, reading from your work, and for just opening up and telling us about the things that matter to you, and that insight into Dead Drift. All the very best, Andy. Thank you.
You take care.
Bye for now.
Thank
Bye
you
for
so
now,
much. Take care.
A pleasure. Bye.